Okay, class, picking up where we left off at, we came up with -4 and 6 as the two numbers that we need to use here. Because we know -4 times 6 will give us the -24, and -4 plus 6 will give us the 2 here. So we will have x squared minus 4x plus 6x minus 24 equals 0. We group the first two terms and we can factor out x, and we'll be left with x minus 4. We could group the second two terms, which factors out the positive 6, and we'll be left with x minus 4. And that equals 0. These two parentheses match up. You write it down once, and what's left, you write it in its own parenthesis. So now we set each individual parenthesis equal to 0. Now, we will add 4 on both sides here, and we add x is equal to 4. We will subtract 6 on both sides here, and we will add x equals 6. And our final answer here is x equals 4, comma, -6. Now, if you notice here, both of these ended up with the same answer, just a different method. Now we scroll down here. They want us to solve example 3. We could use any method that we want, but I just believe that we should use the quadratic formula because that's what this section is all about. We've done a lot of factoring already. So just to get in this practice, let's try the quadratic equation. Now this equation is set to 0, but before we do anything, we should see if we can factor anything out. We cannot factor anything out here. So we will list our A, B, and C. Our A here is 2, our B is -7, and our C is -3. So we do the quadratic equation. So it'd be -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we have x is equal to negative, now b is -7, plus or minus the square root of, it'll be -7 squared minus 4 times a is 2 and c is -3. And that's all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. So we have x is equal to, the opposite of -7 is 7, plus or minus the square root of -7 squared is 49. And then we will have a -4 times 2, which is -8, times a -3, which will give us +24. And that is all divided by 4. So we will have x is equal to 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 plus 24 is 73 all over 4. Now there is no perfect square in 73, and 7 and 4 has nothing in common, so this here is your final answer. Now we go here to B. We cannot use the quadratic formula because this is not equal to 0. So our first order of business, let me separate this. Our first order of business is to subtract 5 on both sides. Now we will have 3x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0. Now we can list our A, B, and C. Now to conserve room, I'm going to write A, B, and C above here. A, B, and C. Now A is 3, B is -4, and C is -5. So we go through and substitute it into the formula here. So we have x is equal to the opposite of -4 plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4 times A is 3 and C is -5 all over 2 times a, which is 3. So we had x is equal to, this will give us positive 4 plus or minus the square root of, this will be 16. A minus 4 times 3 is a minus 12, times the negative 5 will give us a positive 60, all over 6. Now, we will have 4 plus or minus. Now, 16 plus 60 is 76, all over 6. Now, we have to think this through. What is the highest perfect square in 76? Okay, the highest perfect square in 76 is actually 4. So we could write this as 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 19, all over 6. So this will be 4 plus or minus 2 square root 19 over 6. Now, for the sake of this problem here, 4 and 2 both can go into 6, and all three of these, the greatest common factor of all three of these is 2. So 2 goes into 4 twice, 2 goes into 2 once, but we don't have to write the 1 because we have the square root of 19, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. So our final answer here is 2 plus or minus the square root of 19 over 3. Now we scroll down here to C. C is the same difference. We must get this to equal 0, so we will subtract 14 on both sides. And we will have x squared minus x minus 14 equals 0. Now we'll list our a, b, and c. A is 1, b is negative 1, and c is negative 14. So we'll write out the formula. It's the opposite of whatever b is, which is negative 1, plus or minus the square root of, b is negative 1 and that's squared, minus 4 times a is 1, and times c is negative 14. And that is all over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1. So the opposite of negative 1 is 1, plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared is 1, minus 4 times 1 is a negative 4, times a negative 14, which will give you a positive 56, all over 2. Now this will give you 1 plus or minus square root of 57, all over 2. So now our final answer here is x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 57 all over 2. There's nothing more we could do with that problem. Okay, now we come here to D. Now with D, we must first multiply this monomial by this binomial. Use the distributive property. 5t times 3t is 15t squared. 5t times a minus 2 is a minus 10t, and it equals negative 1. Now we need to add 1 on both sides of the equation. So remember, our equation must equal 0. 15t squared minus 10t plus 1 equals 0. Now we list our a, b, and c. Our a is 15. Okay, now we have b is equal to negative 10 and c equals 1. Now we go through and substitute. We have x is equal to the opposite of negative 10 plus or minus the square root of negative 10 squared. Oh, that's supposed to be minus. Negative 10 squared minus 4 times a is 15 and c is 1. And this is all over 2 times a, which is 15. Now, This will give us 10 plus or minus the square root of 100. Now, negative 4, or minus 4 times 15 will give us a minus 60 times 1, which will give us a minus 60. And that's all over 30. So, we will have 10 plus or minus the square root of 40 all over 30. Now, the square root of 40, the highest perfect square in 40 is 4. So it'd be 10 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 10, and that's all over 30. So it'd be 10 plus or minus 2 square root 10 all over 30. Now we need to separate this fraction here. So we will have 10 over 30 plus or minus 2 square root 10 over 30. Now when we simplify this, 10 over 30 is 1/3 plus or minus 2 and 30 has 2 in common. So your numerator would be square root of 10 and your denominator would be 15. And this would be your final answer. Now, we look down here at objective 2. Determine the most efficient method to use when solving a quadratic equation. It says which method to use. When you have a quadratic equation, which of the 3 methods should you use to solve it? Locate the squared term. Are all the other terms just numbers? If you use yes, you could use the square root method. If something squared equals a number. Or if it's no, then we would take this route here. Get the equation in this form here. You have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Then you determine if you can factor. If you could factor, you factor and solve. And then if no, you'll use the quadratic formula. So basically this here, if the answer to the first question is yes, you will use this form here. If the answer to the first question is no, you have to determine if you do the factor and solve or use the quadratic equation. And that's based on this second question here. Now, of course, you could use the quadratic formula for any of them, and you could bypass looking at all these methods, but it's still very good for you to know which method to use. Now we have example 4. We had t plus 4 squared equals 27. Since we have this, we can use the square root method, which would be t plus 4 parentheses squared, and then the square root of 27. Square root and square would simplify out, and you add t plus 4 is equal to plus or minus. The highest perfect square in 27 is 9. So we could break that up to the square root of 9 and the square root of 3. So you add t plus 4 is equal to plus or minus 3 square root 3. And we would subtract 4 on both sides. And t is equal to negative 4 plus or minus, okay, it's supposed to be that 3 there, 3 square root of 3. And that is your answer for A. Now we look here at B. We have x squared is equal to 4 times the parenthesis x plus 8. So we have x squared is equal to 4x plus 32. We use the distributive property. Then we'll subtract 4x and subtract 32 on both sides. So now we have x squared minus 4x minus 32 equal to 0. Now we could do the factoring method, which, you know, we've covered plenty of times. So I know you all know how to factor when the coefficient is a positive 1. We have x minus 8 and x plus 4. And we'll set both of these equal to 0. Add 8 on both sides here. And x is 8. Subtract 4 on both sides here. And x is negative 4. So your final answer is x is 8 and also negative 4. And that is it for that problem.